sorry if I
this is,
interrupt you. Sorry if I interrupt you, but I just want to ask a quick question. How do you connect
sure.
this? How do you connect this perspective that you started to elaborate now to this big world of global politics, of great powers, of material distribution of power, and so on and so on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about something like all the metaphors that we use in international politics, like balance, for example,
Mm.
like power balance, balance of power. What does that mean, balance? How do you know what that is? And you can look it up in a dictionary and there's a definition, right? But that's just word. Those are just words. When you want to understand balance, you should think of it in much more basic sense. Like you get up from a chair or you get up from your bed and you find your balance, right? You're moving around. You're in a vertical position. You can risk falling, but then you find your balance again. So this concept has an embodied foundation. It's grounded in a meaning which is more than just words. And this is ultimately how we understand things. We don't understand things with the help of words. We understand things with the help of our bodies. And you see this when you look at, for example, newborn children, because newborn children don't have any words, right? They're learning about the world by means of their bodies. And this is how meaning arises in the fruit. I'll give you one more example. Say something like the state, right? Everyone talks about the state. Now, what is the state? The state is a concept that was introduced in the 16th century by Machiavelli, and it has to do with the status, the stato of the ruler. And the stato of the ruler was his status. That what kind of status do you have? Well, that your status determines your stato. So it was very important, for example, at that time to impress people with your like very elaborate court, ostentatious parties. It was very theatrical. You had to impress people with your armies too, of course, but in general, just with kind of political theory and political theater. And the reason was that this is how you established your state, your status. And it was intimately connected to the person of the king. The king was the person who had a status. And only much, much later does the state become an abstract concept. And again, here, what you find is that the idea of status is something that you feel, right? You feel that you have a certain status. You treat a king in a certain way because he has a certain status. So this is how this concept also has a kind of foundation in embodied pre-linguistic meaning. And this is where I started to think that constructivism is just, I mean, it's okay, you know, but it's like it arrives too late on the scene, you know, it arrives when meaning already has happened. So meaning is something much more fundamental. And then a couple of days later, the constructivists show up and they say, oh, I know this, I find that in my dictionary, you know?
Yeah.
And then it becomes kind of cognitive and explicit. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a sort of later stage. So if you really want to understand like the
this embodied approach, this realist embodied approach in a sense, or this phenomenological embodied approach to the world, to human beings, to politics, is there a risk that it becomes reductionist in the sense of it becoming neurobiological?
Yeah, I mean, this is one part of it actually. That you're right. It's a kind of embodied realism, because you're talking about not everything is interpretation, because suddenly it matters a lot, like what we are as bodies, and the bodies of course, are quite similar. You know, some people are short and some are fat or whatever. But in terms of functions, all our bodies are kind of the same. So in that sense, there's something like a human nature and also an ability to understand each other, right? I'm very interested, I'm writing now actually, I'm very interested in the case of first encounters, you know, like when the first Europeans met the first people in the Americas or whatever with Columbus. And constructivists are writing about this and they're saying, well, it's a question of how they interpreted the Indians and how the Indians interpreted the Europeans. And it's all about kind of, you know, whether they posed a threat or whether we should attack them. But if you actually look at what they were doing, something wonderful, right? Really amazing. Very, very often they were dancing together. So the Europeans, Columbus, Vasco da Gama, all these explorers, they spent a lot of their time on board the ships dancing because they needed to keep the sailors fit and they needed to exercise and just entertain themselves. And then when they got to these places really far away, they needed to somehow communicate with the locals. And they had no language, of course. So they had no way to do this. So what can they do? And they started to play violin and they started to dance. And the locals came, oh, okay, we understand this. And they were dancing together. And there was a sort of communication there, a basic understanding, which didn't have anything to do with words or with interpretations or knowledge, but it was just like an embodied relationship, a way to interact, to get to know others in a very kind of like carnal knowledge, you know, like biblical kind of carnal, you know, with your body. And I find that really interesting. I mean, of course, ultimately it was not enough. And that was not enough of a basis for peace. Or I mean, they still started shooting each other and killing and European diseases and all this. So it wasn't a solution. And I mean, I guess in a way, this is not really an IR theory. I'm not talking about IR theory now.
No.
I'm just talking about like, where does meaning come from? I guess that's what interests me. So if you're talking about meaning in international politics, how do you attach meanings to things? It seems to me that you have to go further. You have to understand really how meaning is a creation of your interaction with the world.
Yeah.
And this is phenomenology, and it's, I guess, neuroscience as well, because neuroscience can explain quite a lot about this.
Yeah. Another question before we start wrapping up this little session and this interview, because I want to dig into some of the core concepts of the IR theories. When I interview different scholars, I ask about their preferred core concepts. And even though you might not consider yourself a classical IR constructivist any longer, or if you have ever done that, when I read your work, and the knowledge that I have of your work, always the concept of recognition comes up. So I wonder, why has this concept of recognition been so important to you and in your previous work?
Yeah, well, I think recognition is a concept that is, I guess, introduced by Hegel. Hegel was a German philosopher right after Kant at the beginning of the 19th century. And what he tried to do was to overcome divisions between ideas and reality, or between individuals and society. And he had to somehow find a way of bridging. And this idea of recognition is one of those concepts that allow you to look at an interaction between two different things. So the two people, and they're wondering who am I and who is this other person? And it's by means of recognizing a person that you you come to see that person as the same person as someone you've seen before. So it's like a bridging concept that allows you to look at interaction. And I think that's an important concept in constructivism. And also the ones I mentioned before, like meaning, interpretation, culture, are also very important. So it moves to this level of ideas, really. But as I try to say, that's also what I find to be problematic, right? I think that it's too much a question of interpretation.
Thank you very much. Very insightful, very interesting. If you were to give, before we end, if you were to give an advice to the IR students at Malmö University, what would that be? Not easy.
I don't know really. Don't trust your teachers. Think for yourself.
Don't trust me.
No, but it's very, very exciting to think about stuff, to use ideas and to try to understand what's going on. And it's a fun thing to do. You know, it's an exciting thing to do. It's like partying. It's like, you know, drinking or, you know, dancing around. It's an exciting thing. So don't treat it as boring homework, because it really shouldn't be. There's an intellectual excitement there that I hope you don't forget.
Yep. Thank you very much, Professor Erik Ringmar. It has been a true honor to talk to you. It has been a true honor to hear your thoughts and your perspectives. And thank you very much for enlightening us.